Hello, my name is Damon Friedman, co-founder and president of SOF Missions. As a 20-year veteran within Special Operations, I've gone through many challenges due to my military service and time in combat. We felt called to start SOF Missions to serve our fellow brothers and sisters in arms, focusing on suicide prevention and resiliency. Our mission at SOF Missions is to empower warriors to find purpose and be resilient. Since 2011, when we started the organization, almost 3 million men and women have deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the scars of war take a toll on their psychological, physical, social, and spiritual health. Many veterans feel a sense of hopelessness and a loss of purpose when they return to civilian life. They feel isolated and alone, unable to reconnect. And in the greatest of tragedies, over 20 veterans lose all hope and take their own lives. Our goal at SOF Missions is to provide veterans the tools and resources so that they don't become a statistic. We offer a unique approach to combating veteran suicide through a whole health, intradisciplinary model. The Be Resilient program is a 4-pillar methodology that addresses the areas of psychological, physical, social, and spiritual wellness. We provide care through 3 delivery methods: medical clinics, retreats, and educational training. Since we started back in 2011, we have been able to reach veterans in all 50 states and have served over 3,000 veterans through the Be Resilient program. Being resilient is a multifaceted and complex issue. We know that to find a lasting solution, we have to address the whole warrior. Many challenges cannot be solved by providing the treatments and modalities of just one component, but by tackling them all. Now, we've expanded our services to include law enforcement and first responders. Together, we can make a lasting impact in the lives of warriors across the nation. To learn more, visit our website at sofmissions.org.
Proceed to your post assignment. All units proceed to your post assignment.
All right. This ain't just a show. This is a platform. Veteran built, battle tested. Welcome to the Misfit Nation. Yeah! In a room, built from boots on the ground, now we breaking the rules. 2 vets, 1 leader, painting the sound, turn scars into sermons, let them echo around. Authors with truth, musicians with fire, actors backstage chasing something higher. Entrepreneurs bleeding just to get ahead. If you fought for your dream, yeah, you are what you said. If they told you no, if you still came back, if you fell to your knees but you stayed on track, this is your voice, this is your flame. Say it loud, remember the name. No salvation, just elevation. We rise again. From the fight to the end. We are the Misfit Nation. No damn labels, no damn cages. If you're still breathing, you belong. Turn it up. This is our song. Yeah. This is our song. Yeah. Veterans standing with ghosts in the chest. First responders running in while the world second guess. Gold star names carved deep in the soul. Your story ain't over, we carry the whole. Coaches teaching mindset, breaking the chain, turning barely alive into owning the pain. Truth over polish, scars on display. If it's real, let it bleed. That's the misfit play. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels cold. If it's heavy right now, and the dark feels close. It's Aubrey right now. We're the more than you know. 9888, don't walk alone. Veterans press 1, bring it home. Don't trade forever for tonight. You're still needed in this fight. We are the Misfit
All right. Welcome back to the Sunday after dinner edition of the Misfit Nation. We know you have plenty of other places you could be, but tonight you're hanging out with us here on the Misfit Nation and collecting your frequent flyer miles. So thanks for being here. Thanks for turning down your TV, and thanks for being part of the Misfit Nation. I know you had a lot of things going on this past week. You had the Olympics. You had the Super Bowl of NASCAR today as Tyler Reddick wins the first race of the year for 2311 Racing, and Michael Jordan gets his first Daytona 500 championship trophy in his garage. So great race there. In the road running world, the Barclays Marathon kicked off yesterday. 40 racers started the race, and as has happened 26 other times since this race's inception, 0 finishers. There's still two runners on the course, but no one has made it through 3 loops, so 60-plus miles of running, and no one has finished the marathon. But to those who tried, good on you, and there's always next year when Laz smokes the cigarette again. Tonight, we have a great guest coming on. He's been through it all. He's been through the ringer. But the Misfit Nation's welcoming Daniel Gray, author of The Men from the Medium. He wrote his memoir entirely by hand while incarcerated, confronting his past and committing to rebuild his future. His story is one of accountability, grace, and faith, and the hard work required to truly change. So without further ado, let's welcome Daniel Gray to the Misfit Nation. Welcome, Daniel.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on.
It's great to have you here, and hope the music got you pumped up a little bit. That's our new opener. It gets everyone a little riled up.
Did somebody record that for you guys, or?
We did it through Suno. We wrote the lyrics and had Suno do it for us, so it came out pretty well.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So, Daniel, I just gave basically the elevator pitch speech about you out there, 30 seconds on you. If you don't mind, give us a little more about you from as far back as you want to go to how we got to where we are today.
So I can start at the very beginning. Originally, I was born in Blackpool, England. My dad is from Texas. My mom is from England. She was raised in South Africa and Australia. They actually met in Germany. I have 2 brothers. I had a sister who passed away. She was born special needs, and that's the reason we moved to America. So when I was 7, I moved from Birmingham, England, to Irving, Texas. And, we came here looking for better healthcare and so forth. And I fell in love with America, and I have like my whole dad's side of the family. They're all like very, very Texan. And my parents, they separated when I was about 12 or 13. I stayed with my dad. He was a software contractor. So we moved every year. And so we went from like Irving to Dallas, from Dallas to Galveston, from Galveston to Atlanta, Georgia to Jacksonville. And at some point I ended up just staying in Jacksonville. And so when I was 18, I went back to England. I did 2 years worth of education. I came back and I started working in the bars. And I was a bouncer, and then I was a bartender. About 25 years old, I met my ex-wife, and I got involved in martial arts. So I became a professional fighter at age 30. I moved to Taiwan. I lived in Taiwan for 3 years. I fought and trained. I was never a good fighter. I lost 3 fights in a row as a pro fighter. And I came back to America, and I was about 30, probably 34, 35 years old. I was living in Jacksonville Beach, and I took a job in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was right around the time when Donald Trump first came around. So to preface all this, I am one of the January 6th defendants. And I guess that's going to come out in the story later, but it's important to tell that now. And so I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I take on a job, and I get involved in drugs and alcohol really badly. It strained my marriage to the point that my marriage actually ended up ending. It was a very, very tough ending for my marriage. And so I ended up, I loaded up my car and I moved to Las Vegas. And I just decided I was just going to go live in Las Vegas, and I worked for a nightclub, and I got really big into cocaine and alcohol when I was in Vegas, and it got bad. I mean, it got really, really bad. I was dealing with some unresolved emotional issues and so forth. And I ended up having a fentanyl overdose when I was in Las Vegas, and I woke up in the back of the ambulance. I bit through my tongue and I chipped my front tooth in half. And, that was kind of a turning moment for me. I thought it was, I committed to sort of changing my life. I got a job selling timeshare. I tried to get myself sober, and then COVID happened. And so, all of a sudden I'm living in Las Vegas and the entire city just shuts down. Like, I remember walking down the strip in Las Vegas and seeing all the signs shut down. And I ended up moving in with my dad in Austin, Texas, and I got kicked out. I'm drinking too much. So I ended up back in Atlanta, Georgia again. And I'm sleeping on the floor of a friend's house, right? And this is when I get really big into, I've always been a conspiracy minded person, but I get really big into conspiracy. So I start doom scrolling, and, you know, all the Epstein stuff that you're seeing now was coming out back then, sort of on the alternative media. And it was just at the same time as that 2020 election comes around. So I'm living in this house, and, you know, all these mail-in ballots show up. I'm getting really, really radicalized by reading on social media. And, you know, the election happens, right? And, you know, there was a lot of very strange things that went on with that. You know, that is what it is. But I got involved in it. I got very, very deep into it. And so when the president said, hey, you know, we're all coming up for January 6th, yeah, I went. I bought a ticket. I went by myself, and I went up to the protest. And I guess I can kind of unpack that story now. So I go to the protest, and, you know, I watched Trump speak. It was a freezing cold day. My feet were soaked. I had Converse on. And I remember thinking, man, the president's talking a lot. Kind of like an underwhelming speech. I guess I had in my mind that he was going to bring Joe Biden out in chains or something like that, but that just wasn't the case. And then he tells everybody, I'm standing in this crowd, and he said, hey, everybody walk down the lawn of Pennsylvania Avenue, and we're going to go to the Capitol and let your voices be heard. And so I walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, or actually down the lawn, forgive me. I looked at Pennsylvania Avenue, and it was like seeing a carnival or something. It was all these, you know, people. It was just a sea of people, like 2 million people. And I get to the front door of the Capitol. I mean, I'm sorry, I get to the front of the Capitol, and it's quiet as a mouse, and you can hear a pin drop. We're all waiting to hear what happens inside. And like simultaneously, like 5 or 6 people with bullhorns, they all shout out, you know, Pence betrayed us, Pence betrayed us. And the crowd, it just pops, you know. And I tell people all the time, I've worked in like concerts and events for years. I've seen like 80,000 person concerts. I've never seen a crowd move like that. It was like the ocean, you know. And so I get separated from the group that I'm with. And I go to walk up to the front of the protest where the protest line is and the police are, and there's a bit of conflict going on there. So I go to take a photo. I go to take my phone out. I go to take a photo. One of the officers snatches my phone out of my hand, and I get pepper sprayed in the eyes. And that was kind of the excuse that I needed to get involved. You know, looking back on it, you know, I went there with a lot of volatility. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I don't think I went with the right intentions. And when that happened, you know, I dove in, I put my back to the police. I got pushed through the crowd. I ended up at the front door of the Capitol building. Eventually I get hit with tear gas. I mean, the whole thing's going crazy. And I'm at the very front door of the Capitol building. And this video is actually, it's pretty well circulated now, but there's 3 officers. They turn around, they walk us in the building, and they walk us in the door. And, you know, my assumption was at the time I was being let in, but, you know, that's not an excuse for my behavior that day. I definitely behaved the way I shouldn't have. So I go inside the Capitol. I see the officer that I believe stole my cell phone. I actually recognize him from being in front of them. And I walk over, and I go, hey, can I have my cell phone back? And I asked for my cell phone back like 6 times in a row. And they actually play that video of me in front of Congress for the January 6th commission. And there's an issue where the officer swings a baton at my head. I put my hand up to stop the baton. 14 seconds later, the officer slips and falls on the steps. I'll get into that later. So I turn around and I walk out the building. I hear a cop go, hey, guys, it's a felony to be in here. And I'm like, oh, wow, this is a lot deeper than I thought it was. And so that was kind of it. You know, I go home, and I go back to my Airbnb. I reunite with my friends. I find a friend's cell phone. I get on my other social media. I see that there's just a bunch of stuff going on. And I'm like, wow, this is a big news story. You know, I didn't really understand the gravity of it, but I saw that it was a big news story. And so I fly back to Atlanta, and I get back to Atlanta, and I get dressed for work the next day. You know, like I've actually posted on social media at this point, yeah, this was, you know, awesome, and so on and so forth. I've just told on myself, and I have no idea of the gravity of the situation at this point. But I get back to Atlanta, and I go walk into my job. And as I walk into my job, everybody just like, they won't make eye contact with me. And I'm like, oh man, I'm probably in a certain amount of trouble here. And so I think to myself, I'm like, I should probably go on the run. And I know it's not funny, but that was the mindset I was in. And so I load my car up and I drive to Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm staying with a girl I knew at the time until that doesn't work out. I move into a job site. So I'm sleeping on the floor of a job site, and I'm making some money. So I get back on my feet. I'm not having to pay rent. A friend lets me move in. So I'm like, all right, cool. You know, April passes, it gets to May. I kind of think, you know, I'm not really somebody who watches a whole lot of media, believe it or not. So like, I kind of think the whole thing's sort of blowing over. And so I'm like, all right, let me go get a job. I get a job, you know, I get my paperwork on, and I drive to the beach one day, and I'm driving to the beach, and all of a sudden, like, the car behind me is getting pulled over. And then that car moves out the way, and then I realize I'm the one getting pulled over. And so, you know, I go to stop my vehicle, and then it's like, you know, driver, step out the vehicle with your hands up. And I was like, what in the heck is going on? You know, so I pop my clutch. I had a stick shift, and I stick my hands out the vehicle, and I open my door, and I walk backwards toward the sound of their voice. I lay on the ground, and I get handcuffed, and they pick me up, and I see all these FBI agents, and I'm like, oh, I knew exactly what it was at that point. So That began a 3-year ordeal with the DOJ. And, I was homeless at the time. I didn't have a place to live. I couldn't go back to my friend's house. I had a parole officer who was gracious enough not to make sure that he let me be free during my indictment. But, during that indictment, I had to get work. I had to get a place to live. I had to work on getting sober. I mean, it was a really, really tough period in my life. And so about a year into that, I ended up meeting this girl. And believe it or not, she was like a very, very liberal girl that I met. And covered in tattoos, like LGBTQ plus community type stuff, like really into that whole world. And we were bartending together, and we ended up going on a date. And I told her, I'm like, hey, I'm one of the January 6th defendants. And she like lurches at me, and she's like, I was screaming at you on the TV that day. But for some reason, we hit it off, and she moved me into her house. And so, while I was under indictment as a January 6th defendant, I was living with a very left-leaning woman, and she ended up standing by my side the whole time. I guess I can go back, and I was facing 37.5 years. I had some of the most serious charges of any January 6th defendant. I had the 1512 obstruction charge, which is the one that went in front of the Supreme Court. And then I had an officer assault charge, and I had multiple charges underneath of that as well. And, it was one of the biggest news stories in Jacksonville. I was in all the major headlines and everything else. And I did everything I could when I was under indictment to sort of stay out of the media, because I understood how detrimental it was for me. I mean, anytime my case took a turn or we filed any type of motion, I'd end up back in the news again. And so a lot of it came down to the officer assault charge. What the DOJ did was they strung together the picture of me with my hand up blocking the baton, and the officer's eventual slip and fall down the stairs. And they put those two together, and they tried to put an officer assault charge on me, which was like a 20-year charge, with body harm enhancement. And I was just adamant. I was like, this was not intentional, and I'm not the procuring cause of the fall. You can say that I was part of the crowd and so forth. And so that was the main reason. I mean, I would have pled guilty, honestly. I was, basically one step away from being homeless the whole time. I mean, honestly, prison didn't sound like a bad idea, but we fought the case. I had a good public defender, and it went on and on. I mean, this case went on and on. And eventually I was on Twitter one day, and I found a bunch of videos. Like, whenever another defendant would go to trial, their videos would become public. That was the only way we could get video access, because everything was held behind a protective order. And so I go on Twitter and I find a video, and it's a bird's eye view of the officer assault, because they only gave me 5 body-worn cameras, so it was very hard to piece it together. And I found a video that showed the officer standing about 6 seconds later, and I presented that to the prosecution. We got them to rewrite the statement of offense like 4 times. I had a very diligent public defender who got somebody else into the case, and they did a 36-picture mock-up of everything to show that, like, hey, Daniel was involved in this, but he couldn't be the procuring cause of this fall. And so that's what my whole case was about. And we ended up settling on a wording issue. It was like, we changed like 5 words in the statement of offense, but it gave us all this leeway now. I could go into my sentencing. I could argue about the severity of the charge itself, not to get too technical. But I signed a plea agreement for 6 years. It was 4.5 years with the right to enhance it to 6 years. And, we were asking for a downward departure, but we had no idea which way it was going to go. And so, I had the support of my ex-girlfriend now, had the support of a lot of people. I had like 36 character letters and everything. And we presented all this to the judge. And I was facing a very, very left-leaning judge. It's the Honorable Judge Amy Berman Jackson. I mean, she's kind of synonymous with Trump. Like, if Trump does something, she kind of rules against it a lot. And so I just didn't think I had a chance, But we did this, and we go into sentencing. It's a long, drawn-out process. It's like a 2-hour process. And eventually the judge calls me up in front of her. And, it's go time. I'm about to see what I'm getting. And she just starts berating me. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm like sweating, and I'm so nervous. And like, I'm just making eye contact and nodding. And she takes me through the whole process. And eventually she like starts actually giving me a lot of praise. And she's like, what I had done was I'd done a sentencing memorandum where I confessed to like my drug and alcohol problems, my background, the fact that I didn't want to be involved in all this. I made a really strong case for leniency. And, she went for it. And so she ended up sentencing me to 30 months. And I had one of the most successful January 6 cases out of anybody who had the severity of my charges. She saw my side of the story, and she had a lot of mercy on me. And so before I went to prison, I was back on social media now, just kind of telling everybody I was okay because I could finally talk again. And all my friends were like, dude, you need to write a book. I'm like, I don't know how to write a book. I've never written a book in my life, And so eventually I self-surrender. I drive myself to prison, and I go to prison. And about 2 months, maybe 3-4 months in, I sit down and I start writing the book, and I find the beginning, and I just start writing and writing. And eventually the timeline of the writing, it catches up to the time that I'm in prison. So now I'm writing about current events as they happen. Like, imagine the assassination attempt on Trump. I heard that on my radio, and I go out to the pavilion and I see the video and I come back and maybe 4 hours later, I'm writing the story down about it. And the whole thing builds up and it builds up and it builds up until the point, of the election, what happened in prison that night. I threw a big pizza party and I invited everybody. And, the election happens, then we have to wait to the inauguration. And then I call that the longest, the most depressing 6 weeks of my life, where I'm just kind of sitting around waiting. And, there's some dispute about who's getting pardoned. Are we getting pardoned? Are we not? I only have CNN and Fox News to watch, so it's really, really hard to get good information in there. Yeah. And the day of the inauguration, it's me and a buddy. We're sitting in the pavilion, and I'm watching Trump in the arena. And he comes out and he goes, to my January 6th hostages, you guys are going home tonight. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then like about 20 minutes later, my case manager walks in, calls me to the office. I have a paper from the president. You're being pardoned by the president. And about 3 hours later, I have a guy come into my cell. He flashlights me. I grab my stuff. I walk out. I sign my paperwork, and I walk out of prison at midnight. And I had the book about 2/3, probably about 9/10 done. Honestly, I was almost all the way through it, but I couldn't write the ending as it was happening. So I get out of prison. My ex-girlfriend, she dumped me while I was in prison, so I didn't have a place to go back to. And so I end up in an apartment with a friend. I go through different jobs and everything. And eventually I sit down, I finish the book, I get it done. And then I had to talk it into my phone. So I spent like a good 2 months just talking this silly book. It's horrible, man, because this book is emotional. Like it was like it's a true confession of everything I was going through. And so like, I'm talking about my marriage and I'm breaking down and everything else. And I didn't have Wi-Fi, so it's the only way I could do it. And I finally get it onto a text. Then I send it to a friend of mine, and he's somebody I could trust. And he's like, dude, this is actually a really good book. You just need to tighten up the grammar and the punctuation. And this is pretty much a finished book. And so I'm like, there's no way, there's no way I wrote a book. What do you mean? And so I put it into AutoCrit, which is like a book evaluation AI software. It tells me the same thing. It's like, this is a really good book. It has completed arcs. It tells a full story and everything else. And I send it to like 5 or 6 more friends, and they're like, no, this is actually good. And so, I sat down on the book and I said, I'm going to finish this thing up. So to bring you to present day now, life is good. I have no complaints. I live a fairly sober life. I might have a beer here and there, but I'm very restrained. I'm in bed by 9 p.m. I work a good full-time job. I do interviews. I go to church, and I've got my book put together, and it's in a finished copy now. It's been copy edited. I'm talking to a literary agent now. I could self-publish it, but I decided that I worked so hard on this book that I'm gonna give it a real shot and see if there's anybody who would be interested in actually publishing it. And that's my life. That's where I'm at. So.
That's a roller coaster life, if I've ever seen one.
Yeah.
I mean, your travels alone are amazing. How your mom and dad met, how you guys wound up in America to begin with, and then becoming big Texas people, of course, and then now you're in Texas, Florida, East Coaster, Vegas trips, falling into the traps of Vegas, really, with the cocaine and all that stuff out there. And it'll happen to anyone that goes out there. It's traps, and you're going to fall into it unless you have a sturdy background or someone next to you punching you in the head saying don't do it. It's going to happen. So you're not alone there, but you are alone in the fact that you made it out of it, and you're on the other side now. I mean, the January 6th stuff happened, and like you said, it was all perception based on those camera angles, and anyone could have been put in that same situation, but you just happen to be the face of the crime and the face of the time. And there's so many other of your January 6th people that never even had due process. They were just sent away without any process and not even a chance to talk to anybody. But you actually had a trial, got sent to, you got incarcerated. I'm not sure what prison did you go to?
I was in Jessup FSL. And so to piggyback on what you're saying, there are a lot of harder stories of January 6th defendants than mine. I'm friends with a lot of those guys. And there are a lot of defendants who really had tough times. They spent a lot of time in solitary, 4 years without a trial, while incarcerated. A few of the defendants never even made it to trial before they were pardoned, and they spent their entire time in prison. I mean, that could be an indictment of the federal justice system itself, or what they did with the January 6th cases. But I don't look at the January 6th case that I had as being one of the worst. I mean, I think honestly, if you compare it to a lot of other stories, I really got off light. I got a decent enough sentence. I was able to spend my time out in public. I was sent to a low security facility. I was able to walk around. I was in a dorm. The food wasn't even that bad there. I hate to say I don't have a whole lot of complaints about it, but it's just I know what the other stories are like. There were 4 other defendants that actually committed suicide while they were under indictment. It was very tough. It wasn't just it wasn't just being under indictment. It was you had the full weight and pressure of the media on you. And then you remember the entire election, the 2024 election, kind of came down to January 6th. It was I think Kamala Harris did her last speech at the Ellipse, and it was just a lot of talk about us, and so that was incredibly difficult to deal with. Being indicted by itself is enough to crush somebody, but you couple that with like the vitriol from the media and the amount of people that would turn their back on you that you personally and everything else. And I'm not here to tell a sob story. I mean, like I'm actually very grateful that I went through all that because it brought me to a different place in my life. But yeah, it was very, very challenging.
And I think as I've titled the show Redemption, Grace, and Rebuilding After Prison, I think you're already in the grace period, giving yourself grace. You were convicted in the eyes of the public opinion just by the video. It didn't matter what the court said. You were already convicted, and that's always going to be there. And as well as everyone else, you can't erase that. All you can do now is make things better going forward. And I think that's what you're doing now. And you've accepted everything you've done. You've taken responsibility. A lot of people don't take that responsibility. They'll say, oh, this is what happened. They're just trying to get me. You took responsibility, saying, own your actions, own what you've done, own what you do, and put it in your toolbox and say, don't do this again, and drive forward. And I think that's what you've done right here. Yeah,
I appreciate you saying that. It's if I kind of came to a conclusion that like I could spend the rest of my life angry, right? And I have a million people that I could be aggrieved with. I could start with media and politicians, and I could work it all the way down to people that I know in my personal life. And I could spend the rest of my life trying to settle scores, but that is an exhausting way to live your life, and nothing good ever comes from that, And so I looked at everything, and I looked at all the mistakes that I've made prior to January 6th. I looked at January 6th, and I just have to say, you should never put yourself in conflict with the police. That's a horrible idea, and that's what happened with me. And I could talk all day long about is this fair? Is this unfair? But ultimately, my actions got me into that. I could have chose a different pathway. For a long time, I thought I was justified. I was like, the police stole my cell phone. That gave me the right to do things. But, one minor escalation doesn't equal another escalation. And people don't understand one small action can take over the rest of your entire life. And sometimes the consequences don't equal the action. I did this, and all of a sudden this bigger thing happens to me. Well, that's sometimes the nature of consequences. And, so I wrestled with it for years and years and years where and then you have to remember too, that while I was under indictment, there were a lot of supporters. They were very much like, you should fight this. You should go into court and tell the judge to screw off and all this stuff. And, that's a great way to get a 10-year sentence.
Yeah. Easy.
Yeah. And so I kind of looked at the whole thing, and especially when I got to my plea, I was like, if I'm going to sign a plea agreement and I'm going to admit guilt to something, I'm going to be honest about it. I'm going to take responsibility, not just for that, but for everything else that I was going through prior to that, because I needed a reset. My life had spiraled out of control. I found myself in a position where I'd lost not just like my identity, but like my career, my health, everything else. I just thrown it in the garbage. And so I said, okay, if I'm signing this plea agreement, I'm going to be completely honest. And I wrote a 4-page letter to the judge talking about overdosing on drugs, talking about, becoming an alcoholic, becoming somebody who was politically like a zealot. And, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with caring about politics, but man, like the real world is so much more important, and, your friends, and like, don't lose your friends and your family and anybody else over this stuff. And so, when I did that, I was like, this is going to be a reset. I'm going to stick a line in the sand here and say, this is the final moment of all this madness in my life. And so once I'd done that, the only thing left was prison. And so when I got to prison, I was actually in a great headspace. I was ready to get off social media. There was no alcohol. Well, there is alcohol in prison, but not like in the real world, and I could work out every day. I was going to church, and I was doing the right things. And, honestly, it was not a bad experience. There were very lonely moments. I had some tough moments with my family. When my ex left me, I had no place to go, but, I did have peace of mind, and I knew that I'd overcome something big. And I looked at it like, if I get out of prison and I get a job and I'm just selling cars or doing nothing wrong with selling cars, but if I get a job just doing something very simple, like working at McDonald's or something like that, that's success, because getting through all this stuff and just getting back to baseline and putting my feet on the ground and making an income for myself after this, that's huge.
Definitely. And the way you've presented it here, and I'm sure it's in the book the same way, others need to take a look at that and say, hey, maybe I should stop blaming everyone around me for every one of my actions and just look in the mirror. Look in the mirror and say, hey, you did this, brother.
Yeah.
Tap yourself on the back and say, learn and move on. And you, like you said, you can get mad at people. You could have held all that anger towards other people, but you can just let it go and brush it off. Like Taylor Swift says, shake it off, stop moving forward. And just being mad at them just gives them energy, takes your energy away. Let it go.
And that was another thing too, is, you said that I had a pivotal moment where there was somebody I was very upset with that had really gone on social media and really posted a bunch of stuff. It was somebody I'd worked with for years and years. And so it was hurtful. And when I got out, I sent them a message, hey, I'm out, yada, yada, yada. And I was going back and forth with them. And then what I realized was they were getting more energy out of this than I was. The fact that I was upset with them was giving them all this validation, because I'd gone through this major struggle and, I've been in the news and the media. And so they could go tell their friends, hey, look, I've got this January 6th guy so upset. And I was like, I'm not winning this. What I'm doing here is I'm going back and forth with somebody who's gaining more out of this than I am. And I was like, the best success here for me is to step away from it completely and to do what the Bible teaches you, and to forgive everybody and to love your enemy and say, you know what, I have something much bigger in front of me than this, and if I spend the rest of my time fighting with you, I'm going to be exhausted. And then I'm not benefiting anything at all for it. I'm just tearing my own character down. And so, it was hard, but I prayed and I said, God, help me forgive the people that I'm upset with, because I can't be upset the rest of my life anymore. And I have conversations with people all the time now. I don't tell people randomly, hey, I'm a January 6th guy. I do have some anonymity in my city still, but I'm happy to talk to people on the left. I'm happy to talk to them. And, I've sat in front of conversations. I have a job where I'm customer facing. And so I've sat in front of people and I've heard them talk about January 6th. I'm just sitting there like, they don't know I was part of that. But, I just have to accept that that's a part of my life. And, there's no point in getting angry or upset with people about it, because that's how they see the world, and that's fine,
Definitely. It's something you can't erase. Jake, one of my Tuesday crew guys, he said liberal judges and prosecutors were extra hard on January 6ers. In his opinion, it was vengeance against anything associated with Trump. Hats off to you for holding yourself accountable. Yeah.
Well, the thing about the January 6th cases is, every single trial was held in DC. And so, they controlled the courtyard that way. Like I actually said, if my case was held in Florida, I might've actually gone to trial with it. But, initially that was my goal. I'm going to trial with this, but, we did a waiting strategy because I wanted to see what the comparable other cases would do. And it was brutal, man. It was like, juries would go in, they would deliberate for 30 minutes. They would come out and convict you on every single count. Yeah. And then the judge would give the absolute maximum. And some of that, some of that had to do with the way things went in court. People were being upset. They were saying things they probably shouldn't say in court, and they were getting the maximum. And then you walk out of court and the media would be there waiting to see you crying, and it was just a horrible thing to go through. I mean, honestly, federal prosecution in general is a very, very difficult thing to go through, but that was a part of it. There was a retribution angle to it, and the same charge that I had, the 1512 obstruction charge, was the same charge they levied against Donald Trump. And so what you saw in DC was the play against Donald Trump was they had a conspiracy. They had a 1512 conspiracy charge. And the way that works is, if somebody tells somebody, hey, you should go rob a bank, and that person robs the bank, you're now guilty of conspiracy to rob a bank. And that conspiracy charge carries the same sentence as the charge itself. And so the goal was to put Donald Trump on trial in DC and say, we got 300 guys that were convicted or pled guilty to the 1512 obstruction charge. You told them to go there, so you're now guilty of conspiracy to commit obstruction. And that would have held up in DC. It might not have held up in front of the Supreme Court, but that would have held up in DC.
It would have been more of painstaking a money grab, so much money into legal fees, and just drain him personally as a human.
Yeah, and that's the thing about lawfare. Like the process can easily be the punishment. If you get yourself in a situation where you have a prosecutor that decides they have it out for you, they'll stack charges, and that was my case. And like I was guilty, I was guilty of a lot of stupidity. So I had these 9 charges. But the 2 charges on top were kind of like inflated charges. One of them got overturned by the Supreme Court, So, so you can be guilty of a few things, right? But they can build it up with an obstruction or a conspiracy charge on top of that. And they can take a 5-year case and turn it into a 15, 20, or a 30-year case. And that's what you saw in a lot of the January 6 cases. You have what would be like a misdemeanor assault or parading and picketing or something like that. But you couple that with an obstruction charge, and all of a sudden now you have somebody who could do, 10 or 15 years. And they were getting convictions, they were getting convictions and they were getting long sentences.
And it was crushing families, crushing whole lifestyles.
Mm-hmm.
Question from the audience now, and I think this is something we kind of hit on a little bit already. Matt Manuata, what was the moment you realized you needed to take full accountability for your actions? Thank you, Manuata.
That's a good question. Thank you very much for asking it. So I had a lot of conflict and turmoil in me, and I was very, very angry and upset. And I do have to give grace to somebody, and that's the woman I talk about, who's my ex-girlfriend. She's somebody I'm still friends with, but like, I was living with a very left-leaning person. And so on the one side, I have my family, right? My family's like, Daniel, you got to go into court and you got to fight this thing and you got to, go to the bitter end with it. And then she's going, I don't think you're going to beat this case. And I want to see you get out of prison, and, she would just kind of impart that in me, like, hey, I don't think this is something you can win. And so I'm living with this person. She's the only person I'm confiding in. I'm like having breakdowns in front of her and everything else. And after about like 2 years of that, kind of being in that situation, I honestly didn't care anymore. I didn't have a lot of fight left in me. And I kind of looked at my life as being a bit of a wreckage, and I wanted to have something I could build from out of that. And so, there was a point where I was like, you know what? I got myself into this. And it wasn't just the January 6th thing. It was everything prior to that too. It was the way I lived my life prior to that. It was just a lot of very foolish decisions that really could have taken my life. I mean, I'd overdosed on drugs a year before I even went to the Capitol. And now I have a federal indictment with 37.5 years. Like, who's to blame for that? Like, I can point fingers all day long, and, I can lean into politics all day long and say this is unfair, but ultimately I got myself into it. And so, I think a little bit of it was my living situation, and a lot of it was just the exhaustion of being under the indictment. And at some point going, you know what, I do think my life is a bit of a disaster.
I think that realization really helped you out. I think you already had kind of the realization when you had the overdose, and you kind of took yourself out of that situation. But then you wound up in DC because of the momentum of everyone going up there and seeing all the charge and radical, the news telling you this and friends telling you things, and getting into that crowd and freezing in there with your Chuck Taylors on, and knowing that big DT's up there speaking to you. And I can just see him up there giving the speech. I didn't see the speech that day. I was at work. I just saw the aftermath basically. And I was like, oh, what just happened?
And it's very important.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And it's very important that I can't blame anybody but myself. I don't think Donald Trump gave a speech telling me to do anything at all. I wasn't incited by Donald Trump. I didn't think his speech gave me any extra special permission. I went to the protest, they stole my phone, and that was the catalyst for me to get involved, And I just need to say that. It was my responsibility. These are my actions.
And you've said that multiple times, and I think that's the problem with the left in this situation. They wanted it to be his fault. Everything had to be his fault. But as the truth is coming out, and the truth is really hurting them really badly, that they have to admit their wrongdoings now. And they won't, but they have to before they go see their maker. And they're going to have to before they meet their maker. And that's a time for them and their maker to either shun them or send them wherever. But that's up to them. That's between them and their maker. You've made peace with God, and you've gone forward, and you're doing the right things and getting your story out there, and the whole story, not just the January 6th stuff, the before January 6th stuff, the stuff you learned about yourself after while sitting in jail. I mean, you were able to have a pizza party in jail. So that's it was, I mean, it's jail, but you had the pizza party. Not sure how good the pizza was, but it was pizza.
Prison pizza's not bad, man. It's I honestly I've had worse pizza in the real world. They make it out of like tortilla shells and like barbecue sauce. It's not bad.
See, you make sunshine out of it. It's good. We got another question here. This is from Zane and Mary 2. How did writing by hand impact your reflection and transformation process?
I love that question. Thank you for asking it. It was awesome. I mean, I'd go on like 5 and 6 hour writing sprees, and in prison you have nothing but time. So it's just you in a bunk, or you can go walk around the track or go work out. And so, I'd sit down and I'd write and I'd write and I'd write. And I remember I wrote about half the book before I ever went back and read any of it. And, so one day I picked it up. I have terrible handwriting, by the way. And I picked this book up and I'm like, let me read what I've written. Let me see how bad it is. And I'm reading it. I'm like, that's actually not bad. That's good writing. But what shocked me was the way that I was writing about the situations I went through. First off, I was writing with accountability about, yeah, that was a bad decision. That was a bad decision. And then I was giving myself a lot of grace too, where I was, kind of giving myself closure in situations and saying, this is going to be me allowing myself to walk away from this, or this is going to be me allowing myself to do this, that, and the other. And I was like, wow, that's pretty crazy, And the big thing for me was, once I got the book completed, I sent it out. I ran it through some AI stuff as well, just to get some feedback. And, I was talking to somebody and I was like, they told me, they said, Daniel, this book is proof that you've changed your life. And I was like, well, what do you mean? That's absurd. And they were like, no, you went from being somebody who had all these problems and, you were a felon, you were in prison, and now you're about to be an author. And I'm like, it just blew my mind. I was like, wow, and, it just goes to show you how, like, how great God's grace is, how, any moment can be turned around. So, it was hugely therapeutic for me. It was very, very emotionally draining. I actually have only read the book about 2 or 3 times. I need to go back into it now because, we're getting to that stage where I really need to understand my own work. And I, it's hard for me to read, I love sharing it with people, but for me to sit down and read it myself it can be difficult. But yeah, that process was huge. I mean, that was hugely transformative for me.
And it shows, and having sometimes writing for anybody, no matter what you've been through, is therapeutic. Just getting to put the words down or type it, whatever avenue you want to use. Mm-hmm. And knowing that your handwriting is atrocious. mine's horrible too. I was always told I'd be a doctor or a priest. I didn't make it to either one of those, but my writing is still atrocious now. And when I write notes here, I have to look at them and say, maybe I should have typed that because I can't understand my own writing. Mm-hmm. But then when you were talking about dictating the stuff earlier, I was like, wow, if I did that, I'd be here all day trying to do that because I couldn't read my own writing to do it. It'd be horrendous trying to read my own writing, do that in the multiple takes of trying to read that stuff. But it would be fun, I guess.
Yeah, it was, the dictating portion was probably the hardest portion out of it all. I actually just lost a job. When I got out, it was really hard to get some traction again, and I just lost a job. And so I just said, you know what, I'm going to commit to getting this book onto a text. And so I'm in a dark apartment. It's there's no Wi-Fi or anything. It's just me talking into my phone for 14 hours a day. And then when I'm talking, obviously talk to text doesn't do a good job with the translation, so I'm getting all these weird translations. But I just powered through it the best I could, and I got to tell you, like that moment where I actually got the thing completed into my phone was just such an incredibly great moment,
See, Jake agrees. My handwriting is atrocious.
And
I know you talked about your family earlier and how your dad made you leave because you were drinking still. Has your relationship with him gotten better since you come out?
It actually, that's actually it actually hasn't. There was the January 6th stuff. Really, he was really hard-nosed about me not taking a plea agreement. And so, when I got to the point where I was like, this is the best course of action. This is something I need to do for myself, but it's also the easiest way for me to not spend 10 years in prison. I'm 45, turning 46. I don't want to be 55 years old getting out of prison. I didn't know that I was going to get pardoned. There was no way to know back then, And so, when I took the plea agreement, he just kind of cut me off. He stopped talking to me. And so he wouldn't reach out to me when I was in prison. At my sentencing, he actually cussed out the cop and my attorney. I had to ask him to leave. It was just a big disaster, and that's something I would like to work on. But there's a lot of distance. He's moved overseas now, and that's the thing about a federal indictment in general, man. It tears families apart. You get in there, you get around a lot of other inmates, and they haven't talked to their mom or their dad in years. My aunt, I talked to her a lot, and the good thing is when I was in prison, I actually rebuilt my relationship with my mom, and I hadn't talked to her for a while. Now she actually lives in my city, and we see each other all the time, and so there was some good and some bad, but there's still a lot of work to be done there.
And that's something, thankfully, you can work on when you have the chance. If you get to link up with your pops again and maybe have a cup of coffee with them, just, hey, I'm sorry for everything I put you through.
There's these types of issues, they put a lot of strain on everybody, and I'm at a place now where there's a lot of peace in my life. I got to a place where life's comfortable. I don't have any enemies anymore. I don't have any more axes to grind or anything else like that. And so, that's very heavy on my mind, honestly.
We had another question pop in here. This is from Look in the Mirror First. I just said this earlier. I guess they stole my name. But
Yeah.
what role did faith play in helping you rebuild your mindset? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question too. It's huge, you know. I mean, it's absolutely huge, you know, and especially sometimes I look at where I'm at now and I honestly can't believe it. You know, I think back to when I was under indictment, and I honestly thought my whole life I thought it was over. You know, I thought I'd lost everything. I thought there was no hope for me. And, you know, I was very upset with God. You know, I'd always be challenging God, like, why would you do this? Why would you allow this? And, you know, I searched the Bible, and there's a verse I always talk about where it says, rejoice always, pray unceasingly, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. And so my big thing when I was under indictment, I was like, what is your will, God? What is your will? You know, and I found that verse, and it says, rejoice always, pray unceasingly, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God, you know? And I'm like, wait a minute, that's actually the will of God. The will of God is for me to rejoice, pray, and give thanks, you know? And so I look at the wholeness of my situation, and I was praying. I was like, God, please take this away from me. And the truth is, God had already answered, yeah, I'm going to take this away from you. Wholly and completely, I'm going to remove this from your life. But it's going to happen on January 20th, 2025. And so the younger version of me, you know, I just, you know, we want things immediately. We're kind of finite beings. We don't see the future. And so we want things to happen immediately. And so, you know, when I'm praying for all this and I'm not getting that immediate answer, I was kind of feeling like God wasn't there. And, you know, when all of a sudden the whole pardon thing happens, I walk out, I get to a place where I have peace in my life, and I go, wow, Lord, I really see what you were doing there. You know, my job was to rejoice, pray, and give thanks, and just to be trusting and trust in your timelines. You know, I don't think I was such an impatient man before, right? And I've learned patience and peace through that. And like, I don't think I could have learned it any other way. I was such a stubborn-headed guy. I mean, look at the problems I allowed into my life. You know, like, and how else was a man like me supposed to learn except to go through a process like that? And so, yeah, you know, I think the truth was, I think my faith is now stronger than it ever was, but it was God's grace that carried me through it. You know, I think I might've had a mustard seed's worth of faith the whole time, but maybe not more than that.
Now it's sprouted into a tree, so it's good.
It's huge. I mean, like, I just know that all things are possible. You know, I walked around the track every day, and I would boldly approach God and say, you know, Lord, I'm asking you to move the president's heart and get me pardoned and get me out of here. And if you've been to prison, you know, that's an impossible prayer. Like, who gets pardoned by the president? That's absurd. You know, what I'm asking for is insane. And for it to actually happen, what could I ever question God about ever again in my life?
And like you said, when you took the plea deal, you had no idea that President Trump would be President Trump again.
I mean, I don't think any of us did. I mean, it was just, yeah, you know, so
it's like fantasy out there. No one knew
yeah,
that.
And even if Trump does become the president, what are the odds he's going to pardon the January 6th defendants? I mean, we were the most volatile issue in the entire election cycle. Or what are you going to do with the January 6th defendants? And it was probably the most unpopular thing that he did. I mean, we had a lot of supporters, but they hammered him on that one. They hammered JD Vance on that one. If you remember, all the confirmation about Pam Bondi was all about, you know, January 6th and so forth. And so I'm sitting here watching this, like, there's just no way they're going to do this, you know. And I have to give, you know, you got to give kudos to President Trump for that. You know, like, a lot of people say politicians, they don't care about their people and they don't follow through with their word. But him pardoning us was a very unpopular thing. It was very detrimental to his campaign, I think, and he followed through with that. So, you know, I have to give the man absolutely his due for that.
And that comes from him not being a true politician, just being more of a New Yorker businessman, and then fell into politics. So he's not the true politician that we're so used to. He's just a regular New York guy. When he talks, he's just like me growing up in the city. He sounds like any other person in New York. They don't have no filter. They just talk. And that's him, and that's why most people hate him. And
and he's good through the justice system too. You know,
so it's real hard. And for you guys to have that and have him take care of you at the end there, that's amazing. And
yeah. I mean, I
be able to start over.
Yeah, it's such a unique experience. You know, I met an inmate right before I got released, and he basically said to me, he said, "Don't forget that any one of us would trade places with you right now. So don't forget how big of a blessing this is." And that's actually one of the last lines in the book I wrote. Is how could I forget that?
Yeah. All right, we have two more questions came in. We'll get them, and then we'll start wrapping up. This is from Indy No More. How do you respond to people who struggle to believe in second chances? Great question.
Wow. I mean, I guess I can kind of say it like this. The biggest thing about second chances it begins with like this fatigue, right? This is my experience that I'm speaking of. Is like I got to a place in my life where I was just completely exhausted with everything I was doing. And I got to a place where I was like, this isn't working anymore. And so, after that, it's like, okay, well, I need to make a change. And so then it's about taking an actionable step, And for me, the actionable step was sitting down and writing, and that changed my life. It was just I did it without understanding what was going to lead to or what the future even looked like for me, But for somebody who doesn't believe that people deserve second chances, like I can't think of a single person in this world that doesn't have something they regret. I can't think of a single person who is who's ever lived a perfect life outside of Jesus, obviously. And it's like, that's the true grace of life. That's the nature of grace itself. It's not earned. It's not something you deserve. It's one of the highest virtues that a man can strive towards is that grace. And you have to have, the only way you can achieve it is by first saying, these are the things that I've done wrong. You mock grace if you don't hold yourself accountable. You don't say, hey, these are the mistakes I've made. But it's available to any person, and any person can change their life at any minute, no matter where they are. They can commit to a different mindset, a different pathway, stay consistent. And over time, I mean, you'll just see things change. I mean, like I said, I couldn't have imagined myself being on a podcast with you, talking about these things even 2 years ago. That's an absurd thought.
Right.
But I always knew that it was available. I always knew that something, at some point, something could change.
And it has. And like I've said, I think a few times here, I think you're in the right glide path now. You're in the right mindset, and you're in a great place. Just keep pushing forward.
I am.
And go. And last question from the gallery here. This comes in from Twitch. So Helio Gnome, what practical steps can someone take today if they want to rebuild their life from the ground up?
Yeah. So the most important thing, like I said, it's first off committing to the idea that what I'm doing isn't working. That's the fatigue portion where you say, you know what, I've exhausted myself pursuing the same things, my same habits, my same decision making has led me to this place. And that's why you hear me talk about accountability a lot, because the accountability portion is saying, what role do I have in all of this? And extreme accountability is the biggest thing. Take accountability for anything you could possibly think of. Make any problem yours. And at that point, then it becomes committing to a different direction. And like I said, it could be something so incredibly small. Like for me, it was sitting down and writing with a piece of paper. And just staying consistent. You stay consistent and you stay consistent. And the most important thing is you do it without expectation of a result. I don't know what this is going to lead to. If it's going to the gym, if it's staying sober for another day, if it's pursuing another career path, if it's a healthy relationship, I'm just going to commit to doing this because I know this is the right thing, and I'm going to do it tomorrow, the next day, and the next day, and the next day. Like I had no idea I was going to finish a book. I just kept writing and writing, and you can apply that to anything and anybody, and you stay consistent with it. And at some point, you'll look back and go, wow, I'm a completely different person than I was, and that's it. I mean, it just is that simple. It takes a mindset change and an actionable step in an opposite direction and consistency in that direction. And you will find something completely different for yourself.
Definitely. Now, I wanted to share it as my screen here so people can see your book here. Like you were talking about the notes you were taking. Here's the note paper. He's writing on note paper, like a loose leaf paper.
Yeah.
And his handwriting's a little better than mine, I believe.
No.
And then here, is this the cover you're staying with for the Men from the Medium?
Yeah. So that's actually the tattoo I have on my forearm. I got it when I was in prison. And they had these geese that would fly in and out. And so I had this idea of getting a goose with a ball and chain tattooed on my forearm because I kind of had this thing in my head where I was like, if the geese don't know they're coming to prison, why should I know that I'm in prison? Nice. And I know. And it just kind of became the cover, Actually, hold on one second. But I have the book sitting right here. I still have it, like it's my baby, like it just happens to be sitting right there. I was doing some work with it, but at some point I'll probably, it's just sits in a folder getting old. So I'll probably put it in a Ziploc bag at some point, but that's it. That was it. That's it right there. It's just a bunch of pages and a bunch of ink, and that's it. But it's been transformative for me.
That's awesome. I like the cover. It's a very good cover that'll draw people in. And hopefully once your literary agent picks it up and they get someone to bite off, a publisher, it'll go great places.
Yeah.
Well, Daniel, I told you in the green room, there's only 3 questions I ask. I've already asked the first one a long time ago. If someone else wants to chat with you like we have tonight, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
So I do have a website. It's Daniel Paul Gray, Gray, danielpaulgray.com. I haven't done much with it yet. I just got it so I could have it, but it does link to my Facebook page. My Facebook page is Daniel Gray, Gray, author. And you're welcome to friend request me. You're welcome to follow me. You're welcome to message me. I'm very interactive. I'm happy to meet people. I'm happy to talk to people. So, if you want to reach out to me through Facebook, I'm on there 2-3 times a day at least. So, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about anything they want to talk to. So yeah, please do. I'd be excited to meet some of you guys.
Awesome. The website is going across the bottom of the screen. It's been in a chat a few times. Like you said, go on his Facebook, message him there, and he'll get right back in contact with you. Jake said, thank you for sharing your story. May it be an inspiration to others. Best of luck and God bless.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
And our final question, I gave you a sneak peek at this earlier too. What's 3 things the Misfit Nation can start doing tomorrow to be better people?
Well, the first thing is trusting the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Like that was huge. I would say spend less time on social media. Spend less time in the doom scrolling world. Like I know there's a lot of evil in the world. I know that we're seeing things that we don't want to see and all this horrible stuff. But there's always been evil in the world. And there's people out there that you can meet today that you can be useful with and you can help and so forth. And the third thing I would say, exercise, eat right, drink more water.
That's awesome. That's a good last one. A good way to wrap it up there. Daniel, it's been great chatting with you tonight. Thank you for sharing your story. It's a very inspirational story, like Jake said. It inspires people to know that you can go on that roller coaster, you can hit that wall with a roller coaster, and you can stand up and you can start running forward again and have a great life. No matter what the world is putting your way, the Lord has a path for you.
Thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Misfit Nation, make sure you reach out to Daniel Gray and look for his book, The Men from the Medium, when it comes out. I know it's going to be coming out here hopefully within the next year or so, depending on publishing guidelines and such like that. I know they take a little while. But in the meantime, remember, a day tomorrow with you is 100% better than one without you. Do not make a permanent decision to a temporary problem. I know I sound very weird saying it's a temporary problem to you because it hurts you inside, but it's temporary. Pain goes away. Remember Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse, pain don't hurt. Remember that. Drive forward, just like we've been talking about all day today. Dial 988. If you don't want to do that, go in your wallet and take out that 1-inch piece of paper. Look at those 3 names. Call those 3 people. They want to hear from you today, tomorrow, and the next day. If that doesn't work, reach out to us here at the Misfit Nation. We will take care of you. We will listen to you, and we will be there for you in your time of need until we can get someone close to you that can actually help you and take you to the right place and keep you with us. Until next time, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling.
Thanks for checking us out and being a part of the Misfit Nation Show. Don't forget to visit our website at themisfitnation.com. That's themisfitnation.com. Check out all our past episodes and get some of the great Misfit Nation gear for you and your family. As always, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling because we are Misfit Nation. Misfit Nation.